Welcome to Legends of StarCraft. I'm Subsourian, and my co-host is Mark. And today we have Tracy W. Bush, sound designer for StarCraft 1, Brood War, World of Warcraft, all the favorite Blizzard titles. Welcome on, Tracy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell us about kind of your history on gaming music and how you got into it.
Well, back in, I want to say 96 or so, I'd been building computers in my spare time, but I largely worked in IT and stuff like that, just, working on computers for folks. I'd worked previously in like entertainment law and a couple of other things, but I just like building computers to play games, because who didn't? Because that's when Doom had come out and all those games from Lucasfilm were coming out, like Dark Forces and stuff like that, and that was just a lot of fun. And my friend William had been playing this game. He's like, "You got to come see this game. This game is a lot of fun." And I'm like, "What's the game?" And it's called Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness. And so he invited me over to his house, and he's playing it. And it was not necessarily my type of game, RTS. It was a little more cerebral than I liked. Like, just give me something to punch and kick, and I'm happy.
Something to shoot.
But he said, "But you got to see this." And he would click on a unit, and he'd keep clicking on it, and eventually would start telling jokes. And I'm like, "All right, that's really funny." And then not very long after that, I actually met a guy who worked at Blizzard named Bill Roper, who I know you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he offered me the opportunity to get a job at Blizzard. And so I said, okay, but it was an IT job, right? It was working IT. That's what I did. So I went down and I started working in IT. But what I really had wanted to do was to work in sound and music, because I was a musician. I mean, that's what I did when I wasn't doing my job. I got to know the guys in the sound department, and that was the time at which they would just go through and just cast, people walking down the hallway. It's like, "Hey, can you do any impersonations? Can you do a voice? You can be a voice in our game." And they were working on StarCraft, and I was super into The Simpsons at the time, because who wasn't? And Glenn Stafford, who was the audio director, he and I would talk all the time because we had kind of the same musical influences. And he heard me do this impersonation of Professor Frank, who was the scientist guy on The Simpsons. The guy, that guy.
Yep.
And so he was like, "Well, we're doing a new science vessel, so would you like to go do the voice for the science vessel?" And so I recorded this this thing for the science vessel, going, "Like science vessel, like reporting, wow." And then somebody was like, "You know what? That's maybe putting a hat on a hat there. Not that we want to." There's a fine line between like parody and just like saying, "Hey, this is Professor Frank here," and we don't necessarily want to poke the bear of 20th Century Fox, because they could be this. And so I was like, "Well, I can do Mr. Burns instead." So I went in and I was like, "Science vessel reporting," and I did that instead, and it was like, fine. So we shipped it.
Have you heard the massive history behind everyone assuming that was Harry Shearer that did that voice?
I've heard it. You would be surprised all the people that I've heard have been involved in games that I did, and it's like, really? I don't remember that person being there. But
I mean, he wasn't even in the credits, but everyone just assumed, oh, they got the real Mr. Burns to do the
Harry Shearer, and I was like,
yeah,
it's just me. But I'm not trying to brag. I did okay. Harry Shearer would have done so much better.
No, I think you did. I think the voice was iconic.
Thank you. But I wasn't even in the department at that point. I was still just an IT guy. Not just an IT guy. Not to denigrate people who do IT work for a living. I was just I was an IT person. That's what my gig was. And then at a certain point, they were expanding, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to do this." I have no knowledge of how to do sound design whatsoever. So they're like, yeah, okay, we'll let you do this, like on an apprentice level. And so I went in and I started doing sound design work for Blizzard, starting at the bottom. And that's the day I started. And I edited all of the dialogue for the game endlessly. That's how I got started.
Oh, okay. So you kind of did, was your role more the filters or kind of like, this Protoss voice has this, or the comm filter, all that kind of stuff? Or
Well, so back how we did things back then, we didn't do them on Pro Tools because we didn't have Pro Tools systems yet. It was very, still very equipment light department. We had like one mixing board, which was Glenn's, which was a Soundcraft, and like just everything else was really just like kind of whatever we had, like Turtle Beach sound card or what have you. So we kind of did what was destructive editing inside of SoundForge, and you literally had to blend a WAV file to a WAV file, but you had to do it in such a way that it wouldn't peak. It was very painstaking work. Like you couldn't batch process anything. You had to by hand go through and add in every sound effect to make sure that it didn't peak, or that it didn't go too hard, or that it didn't desync or anything. Like there's a lot of stuff that you had to do, especially with Zerg voices and Protoss voices. Protoss voices, we would do this thing where you'd add on a couple seconds of silence at the beginning of the file that you'd recorded with this guy. Then you'd go through and you'd reverse the file. Then you do a reverb pass. You'd flip it again. And then kind of fade in the reverb just right about the point where it felt right. So that's how you get the I'm a Protoss kind of thing.
I've had to do audio design for custom campaigns, and I'm happy to know my method is how you did it.
Yeah,
So.
how we did it.
Yep. Yeah,
there's really no other way.
It works well.
You can batch process some of that stuff now. Not necessarily the fade in, because it's by taste. You want to make sure that it feels right.
Yeah.
And Zerg had some of that as well. We actually had a thing where we would take the main file, pull it out, pull out a copy of it. I'm trying to remember how I did this. This was a while ago. And then go through and do this extreme EQ pass so that only like the super high part of it was done. So like if this was my regular speaking voice, it would just sound like this because just the high part would be left over. And then we would go through and we would paste it in at about like 150 milliseconds after the beginning of the file. So that's how you would get that left over, like this person is talking, but there's like also some kind of subtle whisper underneath it. And they would finish talking, and it would just kind of go like that. And that's how we did those voices.
And you used your voice for, I think, the Hydralisk and the Lurker was the...
I don't think I did the Lurker. I know I did something for the Hydralisk maybe, but we split that up. Like I know Jason did some of the Hydralisk. I don't know that I did the Lurker. I mean, largely Glenn would do Zerg and Protoss voices and everything like that, because he's just right there. He would just go into his office and he'd just get a microphone, and then he would just do it. And that was in the less formalized days of line writing and stuff like that, where he would just go in there and say some stuff and walk away and then cut it up and be fine.
I actually have a theory. I think I know when and where we did the Hydralisk. It was the Christmas map.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. That's right. That's right. Thank you for remembering. I was going to say that because we talked about music tracks that I had done, and I did remember doing the 12 Days of StarCraft. And admittedly, I didn't write that. That was just like kind of an arrangement kind of thing. But it worked, and we had fun. And but yes, that's the Hydralisk parts I did. Thank you for reminding me, because I'm like, I know I did some Hydralisk thing, but I can't remember what it was. And the funny thing is with the Hydralisk, we actually did it. Of all the ways that we processed everything, the Hydralisk was actually done through a guitar effects pedal that Jason had.
Mhm.
And it was just like this thing that he had that he'd been messing around with. And it's like, oh, you need to do the Hydralisk, and he would just hand you the guitar pedal, and you'd go and plug in through that.
Nice.
Oh.
Yeah,
Was there,
I love the Zerg. The Zerg just sound like they're always slobbering. They're always like they're trying to get something out of their throat and everything. Like all
Well,
the
that
sound
is-
design is really good.
That
I
is
love it.
100% all Glenn. I
Right.
learned so much from him about the ethos of being a sound designer and the ethos of designing creatures, because a lot of creatures that people would do before that is they would be like, oh, I'm a creature. All right, I'm going to be a creature. I'm a creature. And they wouldn't really commit to it. And they would just be like, creature, and then pitch it down a little bit. And it's like, that's what you get. You get creature. And that's it. But Glenn would always try to inhabit the skin of every creature that he made. And I've seen him do it where, he like his body contorts and he's like, and he just gets real strange. And it's like, that's how you should do that. That's how you commit to that craft. No pun intended. And I've hewed to that since then. Every creature that I've ever made since then, it's like, you got to know what the creature is. You got to live in the creature's skin. That's how you get the good sounds, not by being like, not having like getting in front of a microphone and being self-conscious about it. You have to commit.
go all
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
I know as Zerg Glenn said, for example, the Overlord, he blended in a horse sound. Were there any other kind of weird things you took from to blend into the Zerg voices, or?
So Glenn did the Zerg units,
Hmm.
and I did all the campaign related stuff. So everything that I did that was campaign related, that had to be legible. But I do remember we had a monster-fied version of Samir Duran in Brood War.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
And I remember somebody coming in and saying, that's too much. It needs to be subtler. Because it was like, we'd made him like just like he turned, but it's like, but you're listening to these things in a vacuum in a room with no other sounds going on. And you're like, it needs to be like that. Because if you put it in the game and you make it subtler, nobody's going to hear it. That time where he begins to show that he's a Zerg.
Yeah.
I was just about to
I'm
ask about
thinking
that.
of the exact line where he's like, I'm here to terminate your command. And at the end of the sentence, you
Yeah, I
can
was curious
hear
if that was an intention.
Yeah.
very subtle.
Yeah, it's
Like-
too subtle. It was originally
like he was
it was originally
transforming
much
in
bigger.
mid-sentence.
Oh, I appreciate
Yeah.
the subtlety there, because it's
I
blood
appreciate
to many.
subtlety too, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I'm
Yeah.
here to terminate your command. Like, just it gets a
Yeah.
little. Yeah, I remember that.
And in the briefing, there's another break, and it's like, okay.
That was
Yeah.
that was, that was
Almost,
Brian George, as I recall, who was a terrific actor. That still is. I've seen him, and he still does stuff to this day. I still see him show up on TV. He's great.
Okay. And also with Duran, did you also do the final one where it's just completely like
Yeah.
he's revealed himself?
Yeah, we had steps that we took with those lines, and
Okay.
I kind of wish we could redo it in stereo, because there's no reason that we shouldn't have done that, because there wasn't anything else happening in those moments. And those lines are all mono, so that, imagine what we could have done if we had taken those Protoss lines and been like, oh, we're in stereo. We can ping pong things back and forth and give a sense of swirliness to the Protoss to make them sound bigger and wider and more dreamy and ethereal, and just add elements into Zerg stuff to make them sound creepier and freakier, or introduce radio noise into the Terran stuff that makes them sound a lot more like they're in trouble. But instead we did this mono stuff. It was fine, but we could have done better. I mean, I'm not saying we could have done that better. I'm just saying I wish we'd had the
tech of the time.
tech and the foresight. Yeah.
If anything, I think it makes it, in my opinion, even cooler that you were able to compromise and do what you did, because the sound design to this day, I think, is probably one of the most memorable things the game has, beyond the spectrum of the story as well as the RTS of it all. I feel like the sound design is what people talk about the most.
Yeah,
and by people, I mean outside the community. That's what StarCraft is known for.
I appreciate it, but I still lay a lot of that on Glenn's shoulders. Glenn lays that path There was a few things that I did where it was like that was 100% my idea. And there's like 3 of those things on individual units. Everything else is him. And he would just come up with the processes and come in and sit down with me and go through with it, and then I would do it. Because again, I was an apprentice at the time. But I learned a lot on that project, and then I had more responsibilities on Brood War, and then more as on War 3, as you know, and then it just continued and continued.
Yeah, and I guess so. Since you did a lot of the mixing too, there is especially with campaign, there's a notable like Protoss tend to be more legible for the hero units that have to speak, and the units are a lot deeper in their distortion. Was that also intentional? At like, oh, we have to make this, we have to hear this versus, oh, this is just unit quotes. It can be super distorted.
You mean in the cinematic mixing?
In like if Tassadar speaking, it's
Tassadar speaking. I don't know if that was on purpose. It just came out that way. Like he just was a lot more legible. But then again, having said that, the largest difference I think between Protoss and Terran and Zerg campaigns is a lot of the Protoss stuff was all recorded off-site with really nice microphones, and we didn't have the best microphones in the office. I think we had one TLM 103, which was okay. I mean, that's still a fantastic microphone for the, upper entry level dudes, but I think they must have recorded them on U87s or something like that with good preamps because they sounded terrific.
That explains, because we talked to Michael Goff, who did Tassadar last time, and he's like, I don't remember going to the corner that everyone's talked about. I went to
he was in the studio. It was up in where was that? It was up in Thousand Oaks or something like that. It was up in
That's probably because he was a contracted actor for a certain character, whereas if you were doing the Science Festival or Glenn was doing the Zealot or whatever, they just walk up to the corner and do it.
Walk up to the corner. If I was doing that, if Jason was doing that, if Tiffany was doing that, if Roper was doing any of that stuff, Metzen was doing that. Metzen would go in the room and do the lines, and it would be on the TLM 103. And but also of its nature, just that kind of processing. We did with the Zerg in particular, we added a lot of distortion into those things to make them sound creature-like and guttural and rough. But with the Protoss, we compressed a little, and then it was just reverb, which just gives you the clarity of the voice. And we didn't really compress or anything. We added some chorus in, I think, on a couple of them, or maybe a phaser to get that kind of swirly, sweepy sound a little bit. But on the whole, the Protoss in general stayed not compressed. And of course, with the Terran units, we radiofied the hell out of those things. So that's also how that will affect the signal. And then also, not for nothing, not to get too technical, but there was also a separate process in runtime in the game where those sounds would be compressed even further. Just to squeeze them down a little bit. Mo had come up with a vocal compression codec just to save, speed on runtime or something like that. So a lot of those sounds that had already been compressed down to, I want to say 16.8K, but it might have been 16.16. Maybe. Well, or 1644 rather. Because I know that original Warcraft was 22K 8-bit. And I want to say maybe we did only do 22K. I can't remember. I actually have an old hard drive with all my old settings somewhere in my garage. I can't find it. That has all of those presets and how we did it somewhere.
If you ever find it, we would love to see it. If you're allowed to show it, I would love to see it.
I don't know that I am, but I do know that I can say they were 2216, maybe, because that's not trade secret. You can just look at the files. But anyway, those would be compressed even further, just to give them room. And we kind of went back and forth with them a little bit to try to at least get them, not too crunchy.
I don't know if you're involved with the N64 port at all, but that had to further compress the music onto it. Okay. I was wondering if you knew anything about the further compression onto the N64 cartridge where they had to cut it down to 2 tracks that were half length.
I didn't know anything about it. I do know that it was kind of a horror show. We were happy that it was out, we didn't touch the port, and seeing it was just like kind of, okay, it's got to be what it's got to be. Try not to, temper your expectations accordingly. And so we went, we listened. It's like, okay. What?
Yeah.
Hey, we got a game out of N64. Hooray.
I know cartridge development's like carving the numbers into a stone tablet or the ones and zeros. So
and despite what people may think, we're not like the kind of people who are like, well, we're not putting it out unless it's perfect on Nintendo 64 or whatever. It was like we were just happy we were there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know that Diablo on PlayStation also suffered from a lot of the same issues.
Yeah.
Yep. It's just a limitation of the hardware at the time.
That's true.
Was Diablo 1 on PlayStation? Is that what we're talking about?
I believe so. Eventually. I think it must have. I remember it coming out. We were so busy with so much else. It was just like one of those days where it was like, oh, also we put out Diablo on PlayStation. I was like, okay.
Right.
Before I move on to the music, and I think Bill already asked you, but I have to ask because now it's almost a running gag on the show. Do you know who voiced Stukov in Brood War?
Do you know?
Because that's been a big
mystery.
I
genuinely, I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I know it was an actor. It wasn't somebody in the studio.
Okay.
But I remember that we got those files in because we were writing the lyrics for the song that was going to play behind them. That thing on the, with the old
fashioned intro.
Brood War aria, yes.
Yeah, we were writing that at the time. And Glenn wrote the music and I wrote the words, which were all nonsense.
Wait, really?
Latin. Yeah. It was. Oh. I think I wrote. I have to look it up. But one of the things, because I'd studied some Latin when I was younger, and I had this book that was just like, how to say some silly Latin things that make yourself sound smart. That just are just gibberish.
Oh no!
One of them is Credo Elvem Ipsium Vivere, which is I believe that Elvis is still alive.
Playing into that.
She starts out Morituri te salutant, which is we who are about to die salute you, which is from the Colosseum in Rome. Let's see, and then the first thing they say is EA son AZ, which is just like a Latin version of Jason Hayes. And then she says it again, Morituri te salutant. Tracy Borgia, which is just Tracy Bush.
This is why I love the first StarCraft game, because you guys just fucked around.
I want you to stress, we have been going through those lines. Like, yes, it's really cool. It's this ballad about foreshadowing the UAE going to a foreign sector.
Subsourian's over here slowly dying as a fan. I'm over here laughing because I'm like, I know it's all bullshit, so I'm just happy about it.
That song almost played at my wedding. I want you to know I love that song before our wedding got canceled because of COVID, but we had that plan to play.
So we do that, the Tracy Borgia thing. I'm trying to remember what happens next. But then when it changes, it goes into French, and Tammy Harrison, she wrote that part because she speaks French. And then that actually had some meaning to it. Which is like the innocent shall not suffer and some other stuff like that. And it was very French, and it was very very highfalutin. But the first part was like, whatever, no one cares. No one's gonna check. So we were just having
maybe in StarCraft 2 they changed the lyrics to be more modified.
It's the same. I got because they reused it in 2 for the Make soundtrack, which I always got a little bit mad about.
Still a great soundtrack.
Oh, it's a great song.
Yeah. And it was written by sung by Heather Green, who is an acquaintance of myself and Bill Roper. She's this terrific soprano that we knew in the Southern California. Great singer. It's so funny after all these years having these conversations. I want you to understand that for us, it was just like, that's just our job.
Mm-hmm.
We go to our job like anybody would go to like be an accountant. Like say you're an accountant and you go to your job being an accountant and you do your accountancy. And then 20 years later, somebody's like, oh my God, do you remember that one time when you did that one filing and you saved that guy the money? And you're like, yeah. You're like, that was a great moment. And you're like, I appreciate it. It was just a job.
Right.
And it's so at the time it was like we had a knowledge of it being the games being successful, but that didn't really affect a lot of our lives because we were still just doing stuff. And it's not like, we were so terribly off that it was just like, hey, I get to do this for a living. This is great.
Yeah. Hey.
And back then, a lot of us were single and we just kind of did it all day long. And why not? What else are you going to do?
The end result was good.
Yeah. And so I am beyond lucky to have been involved with it. I am beyond grateful for the opportunity to do so and the places that it has led my career since then. I'm always grateful to Bill for opening that door for me and getting me in there. Yeah, but again, it's just like we were just kind of messing around and just telling our little jokes and making ourselves laugh.
Yeah.
And
and then people 20 years later are having huge debates on the like biblical meaning of each word.
I do have one story about one of the units. I don't know if it was a Brood War unit or it was a vanilla StarCraft unit. I want to say it's a Brood War unit. There's this one guy who his ship starts leaking gas, and so he begins to hallucinate.
Science vessel, isn't that?
No. It was a prototype.
Corsair.
Oh, Corsair, yeah.
Corsair.
Separate Cochrane, is that you? Yeah.
Okay. So that is Jason.
So that's Brood
Number
War,
one.
yeah.
That's Jason doing that voice. The day they were doing that, I was sick. So I was at home in Long Beach. I was in my bed. I was and the phone rang and it was Tammy. And she said, Tracy, yeah. Says, who is the guy who invented warp travel in Star Trek? And I'm like, is that from Cochrane? She's like, okay. She hangs up the phone. And then like I go to the office and it's like, hey, listen to this. And they'd done that. It was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was always such. I didn't even know it was supposed to be a gas leak. I was like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah. He does something and he gets a gas leak and he starts to hallucinate. And
Yeah, it's funny.
is that from Cochrane? Is that you?
Oh, it looks so different.
What did you do to your hair? Which is a reference to Ghost.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, most of the Brood War especially had a lot of references. I know.
Yeah, it was silly so there was an informal process back then where it was just like give that to the sound team and they'll just make the sounds for it. Part one of the job is just finding a million different ways to say yes, okay, I'm on my way. Is there something you want? And finding interesting ways to say those things, which is the basic unit interactions. Yeah. And then from that point, the piss lines were just like, go crazy, do whatever you like. If it gets too crazy, we'll tell you went too far, which they generally never did. But in War 3 and points forward from there, that began to become more codified, and we actually got like a specific writing team together for that purpose, which was Glenn, Derek Duke, Mickey Nielsen, Chris Miller, Bill Roper, myself, Monty Kroll, sometimes Brian Farr, and Tammy. And we would write hundreds of lines and we would record them all. And then we would bring Metzen down because Metzen was then at that point, he was like, he's in charge of narrative, full stop. And then we would play all these ones for him. And then he'd be like, yes, no, yes. So sometimes with that, we would have ones that we really wanted. So we would write some really bad ones just so he would like, well, these aren't as bad as that. For the ones that we wanted anyway. So yeah,
that's fun.
So I mean, I'm a big narrative guy. I literally obsessed with the lore. Was Metzen not the lead? I know he was a big lead in he was the lead of Warcraft 3, but in StarCraft was he more like I knew it was high up, but was he the head lead or what was his role?
I genuinely can't recall. I know he was lead designer.
Yeah.
But I think as we grew, his title changed. It's hard for me to say because I didn't really keep track of that.
Makes sense.
Not really my purview.
Yeah, makes sense.
but I know he was at the very least the design lead on StarCraft. Obviously, if you look at the credits, it'll tell you. But as we grew out of the space on Corporate Drive, and we grew into the place on Theory, which was part of the UC Irvine extension. This was before, the big campus that's down by where the 5 and the 405 hit, whatever that place is called. Then everybody got to get a bump up, and they had people answering to them, and then they had actual, people reporting to you, and so you got structure and whatever.
Yeah, get a corporation.
But I know there was a point at which it became like his job. Your job is to create the universe, and that's enough. That's plenty for anybody to do. And he'd sort of been doing that anyway. So yeah, I think it was just formalized.
So
I
what
just want to touch up on one thing. I just want to touch up on Stukoth we brought up like 10 minutes ago. The popular theory is that it's Paul Ainsley that did him. Do you recall who Paul Ainsley did? Because if it wasn't Paul Ainsley, I don't know who the fuck he could have voiced.
Well, I tell you, I would get the call sheets, and there were names that stuck out to me. Paul Eiding. I remember when I was doing Paul Eiding because he was General Mansk, and Jack Ritchell. We recorded him as Duke, and he had to come in to do some pickups because some stuff got rewritten. So I remember actually meeting him one time. He came in to do that. I don't remember seeing the name Jack Ainsley. That doesn't mean it wasn't there.
Oh.
I just Paul Ainsley. My apologies. I just don't remember it. It's very possible that could have been there. It was so long ago.
Yeah.
And there is some stuff that sticks out with me. I mean, like I remember that the Zerg Queen was Lonnie Manella, and I remember a couple of other things like that. It was specifically because I remember looking at the cassette and being, because they were on those tapes, those DATs.
Yeah.
They were on DATs. That's what we recorded them on, DATs.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's super dated media.
Tech of the time, yeah.
But I don't remember that specific name.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't him.
Right. We'll find out someday.
Yeah.
Someday we'll find out.
That's been
Someday
a consistent running
paper because I've got documentation somewhere of my steps and stuff like that because I kept all my notepads and things like that I'd taken notes on. So somewhere in my storage or somewhere is a piece of paper that at least has some information on it.
Okay, well that'd be
if I ever discover it, I will let you know.
Thank you, because it's been the running joke of I think we're 8 episodes so far and nobody knows. So
nobody has a clue.
What other? I know you mentioned you did Brood War. Are you? What other music did you do? Any of the other cinematic music, especially for Brood War? Or
no, I didn't touch any cinematics. We had Jason, who was already very prolific, fantastic composer, really, really good. Glenn, who what needs to be said about Glenn? My God, and Derek, who wrote in a way that still to this day mystifies me how he writes his stuff, and he did all the Zerg stuff. And those styles couldn't be more specific to those composers, in as much as the Terran stuff, Glenn with his background of understanding form and function is all so very properly put together, not a note where it shouldn't be. And Jason's stuff, which is it's very evocative and very ethereal, and it reaches for things, and it captures that Protoss feel so well. And Derek, his music always goes into these just dark, broody places, which is just perfect for the Zerg composing. They did all that. I didn't touch any of that. And besides, I wasn't. It must be said, I hadn't composed much of anything in my personal life before that. I was a musician.
Yes.
Like I could play. I could play like all kinds. I could play the hell out of Rosanna, but I couldn't. You couldn't sit me down and say like, okay, write a song. I'm like, I couldn't really do that. We actually had a programmer named Andrea Pacino, who could. He was the CEO of Ready at Dawn, and that guy could just sit down and just improv entire classical pieces just at the drop of a hat, just because he understood the form so well. I couldn't do that. But I did want to. So they threw me a couple bones as time passed. I did this one Pac-Man map inside of the original StarCraft. I don't even remember the piece of music. If you played it for me and you told me that this was a piece of music that I had written, I would say, okay, I believe you. But I don't remember it. Then I did Radio Free Zerg.
That was the next question. Yeah, I was going to ask about
and I can tell you about that process in a little bit. And then I didn't write anything for Diablo 2, but I did do a lot of the cinematic sound design for that. And then I began writing for real for Warcraft 3 when I started with the Night Elves. And these guys had gone to school and everything like that for composition. And, I just played gigs. Like, that's what I did. It's a different world. They had formal training. I hung around people who had formal training. That's
right.
Sometimes that's the best way to learn.
Well, no, and I feel like my composition has definitely come a long way. I'd happily put out something now and say, this is what I've learned from my years of composition. This is, I feel, a strong piece. But back then I listened to some of the stuff that I was like, I didn't know what I was doing. But having said that, having known nothing about what I was doing, I listened to some of those tracks. I was like, that guy was taking chances because I was doing some bold stuff because I didn't know any better. Go ahead.
Oh, so to loop back to Radio Free Zerg, like, what was that's a pretty like iconic. What did you do on that song? Like,
so there was a piece of software that came out from SoundForge. It was called Acid. And I had, like, I said, can I put together because it was a tradition with expansion packs that we do a silly song for an expansion
Medieval Man, yeah.
Yeah. And Glenn was busy and he was working on cinematics, and D2 was ramping up, and Jason was busy and working on cinematics and other stuff. And I'm like, hey, can I do this? And they're like, sure. So since I sat on all the database of all the voice files, I just started chopping them up and putting them in a grid inside of Acid and being like, well, this does that, and this does that, and this does that. And it's very in keeping with the kind of dance club stuff that was sort of in that day. Chris Miller was very quick to point out, like, this does not sound like a dance music song. I believe you. Yeah. I'm just doing a thing here. I don't know if it's any good. And I had fun with it. But some of the instrumentation came from inside of Acid. Some of it were things that I laid down myself and then imported into Acid. But it kept things in a grid, and it could keep things in a key. I put it together, and I was like, yeah, this ain't bad. And so, like, I showed it to the team, and they're like, fine, ship it. And so we shipped it. But it was great. It was like, hey, I got to ship a piece of music. Nobody could say this isn't a piece of music.
Yep. On the genre, I was going to say it was ambient trance before ambient trance existed. So you predicted a genre.
Sort of. Yeah. It was fun to do it. I was listening to it the other day after you guys had talked about what music did you work on. I'm like, what music did I work on? It's like, oh yeah, I did that. And I went and listened to it. I was like, I would have done it so much differently, but it's still valid. Still worked.
Goes back to what you're saying of, like, everyone, this is such iconic. It's like I love this Easter egg, and you're like, I could have done better.
Yeah.
Did you have Jack Ritchell come in and were those lines that you already had for Jack Ritchell as the Overmind, or did you come in and have him, like, give you?
No, those were lines that I already had in, I think, and then that's me as the Overmind.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Serve the Hive. That's me recording into like a SM57 because I had the Overmind processing, so I could make myself sound like the Overmind. So I did his process, his vocal performance.
I just assumed
the thought behind it. Now that I'm saying it, I remember what the idea was. There was a concept behind the thing, which is that what keeps the Overmind functioning, what keeps the Zerg functioning in concert, is that behind the scenes the Overmind is literally just a DJ. He's just pumping out the jams 24/7 to all the Zerg, and the Zerg are all just kind of dancing and kind of doing their thing. And
it's like the Wizard of Oz wizard guy you see behind the curtain. It's just Tracy doing the Overmind.
Yeah, it's just Overmind.
Not actually Jack Ritual.
A 24/7 murder rave is what it was. Just that's what the Zerg are.
I was gonna say, yeah, you convinced me you were the Overmind voice. So.
Awesome. I don't think they stuck with that idea in future installments, but at the time that was again just us being silly and coming up with inside jokes.
Yeah. Did I know there's one brief well done? Was that mixed? I know Metzen I think did that one. Or
that is Metzen as Dagoth.
Yeah.
That's the original line where he says, after the first campaign mission that you do as a Zerg commander, you do their thing, and then Metzen as Dagoth comes in and he's like, I've been observing your victory, young one. Well done. And he says that, and so I just trimmed it and put it in there.
That works.
Cool.
I've had trim campaign lines too, so yeah, that's
so cool. That's so cool.
So I think you also mentioned you did a little work on Ghost, which is, you probably know, now that Duke Nukem Forever is out, the most famous vaporware game. So you mentioned any? Do you have any? Because it's such a black box to most of the community. Do you have any stories of that development? Or
well, again, so many years ago. I mean, it was so long ago, and I don't remember on its surface having done much. But then the funny thing is I look back, because I think there was a thing where somebody had released some of the cinematics. Like you can see some of the cinematics somewhere.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's right, we did that. Oh, that's right, I did that. And I worked on some of the cinematics. I was like, that's right, I did this. Did the music mix. I did the big gun that the dude shoots. And Bill Roper had left, so I voiced the Goliath. Because we had gone through and was like, well, we got to redo all of these units that are in the game now. Who do we have still? And Glenn's like, well, I'm still here. So he could do all those units. But we didn't have Bill anymore, so I did the Goliath. There was a couple others where we had to recast. And so I went in and I was just, doing Bill's Ed 209 voice, which no one, it doesn't exist anywhere, but I remember doing it.
Actually, so a build of Ghost got leaked with all the sound files.
Did it?
I should check. Yeah, I should check if
and
you're in
Goliath,
that one.
I'm pretty sure the Goliath's voices are all out. Yeah,
I think so. I'd have to recheck that one.
You can tell that it's not Bill, but it's better what they did at StarCraft 2.
It's me doing it, but you don't need to compliment me on it, because I'm positive it was just like, this is me trying to do an impersonation of Bill Roper trying to do.
I'm shitting on StarCraft 2 right now, more so than.
But I know we had high hopes for it, but we were kind of really busy at that time chasing down War 3 and making War 3 happen. And we had built our sound studios inside of Theory so we could record with whoever we needed to record. And we were heavy on doing that. And that's when we had Michael Goff come in, and we had Arthur Burkhart, who was Destro in G.I. Joe, and that was a big deal for all of us. And we had all of these people coming in doing recording, and some of them were like idols of ours in particular. And I know that we were really busy with that. And Swinging Ape, I think, was the developer for Ghost. And we would hand assets off to them, so we didn't do any implementation and stuff like that. But every once in a while, they would say, "Hey, we need a XYZ," and we'd go and we'd record it and we'd hand it off. And we would see updates every once in a while in show and tells. But and I always had high hopes for it, because I was like, I always want to see another StarCraft game come out. But at the same time, like I said, we were busy.
Yeah, I believe it. And then WoW came out, which was
and then WoW came out.
WoW was the thing that killed Ghost. I fucking hate you, WoW.
Well, by that same token, they succeeded.
Yeah,
so
they
I
did.
mean, well done for them.
Oh, they
Uh,
did. The StarCraft fans wanted that game.
Oh, I understand. I understand. But one thing that Blizzard always historically adhered to, which is one thing that I always did respect, is that if a game was coming along that just wasn't there, don't put it out. I mean, there of all the games that we've done, there've been other games that were in various stages of development that we just killed because it wasn't happening. There was a game that was in development that we had to sacrifice in order to make WoW, because that was Team 2's original game, and I liked that game and I liked where it was going, but it just wasn't. Was it going to be amazing? It's hard to say. They had to make a call, and I'm glad they made the call that they did, because it catapulted Blizzard to levels of success, and provided livelihoods for many of my dearest friends, and that's a terrific thing.
I don't know if that's a protected thing. What was because there's a lot of games that are canceled games that come out over the years.
I'm thinking of Warcraft Clash of Clans or whatever. Is that?
There was. I mean, everybody knows about
the one that's called
Warcraft Adventures.
Yes, yeah,
that's what it is.
Which was we were trying to horn into
adventure
that
game,
that Lucasfilm Scum game, and a LucasArts Scum game, SCUMM rather, that engine.
Also, another game that recently got leaked in basically complete state.
Yeah, that was a terrific game. I loved
Lord
that
of
game.
the Clans.
Lord of the Clans.
We're talking about the same thing. Warcraft Adventures, Lord of the Clans.
Lord of the Clans. It's starring Clancy Brown as Thrall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
And we all worked on that a little bit. But I think that was outclassed by Grim Fandango, because I think Grim Fandango came out fully 3D, and it was just such a great game.
It is,
and it's like it was nowhere near the quality of what we were doing, and I think the result was, well, if we put this out, even if we polish this thing to an amazing capability, it's not going to touch anything that Grim Fandango was doing right now, and so the decision was made to shelve it, and I don't disagree with that.
I don't disagree either. I'm always of the type that, like, I don't like wasting time, and I know it's not a waste of time. I don't want to say that, but I don't like to leave things unfinished personally in my personal life. So when I see games get unfinished or unreleased, it always makes me kind of depressed.
Oh,
right. But that's a lot of games too.
It is a lot of games. No, trust me.
I have written some of the music that I am proudest of that no one will ever hear and can never hear. Like, I can't even put it out on my SoundCloud or anything like that, because it's owned by subsidiary companies and owned fully in assets. And it's like I worked real hard, and I put together a piece of music that I could listen to and be like, I'm extraordinarily proud of that. And no one will ever get to hear it. And it's just what are you going to do?
I was going to ask then, with canceled games, is it I guess for Blizzard specifically, but overall, is that like a thing of this is still under like covers NDA, I cannot talk or like mention it at all? Or
it's hard to say, and particularly with monolithic corporations owning everything. Who owns what? I don't even know anymore. But I always figure it's better to be safe than to be civilly liable.
Yeah, makes sense, because the composer of the first build, because there were two companies that did Ghost, put out his soundtrack, and I'm like, is this legal? I can't tell.
I don't know. I wouldn't risk it, because I'm just a dude. I can't
fight the corporations.
I can't fight a team of lawyers, with nice suits and in my t-shirts and stuff. I actually do have to go in just a few minutes.
Okay.
That's all right.
If we want to do a part 2 to this conversation at some point, I'd be down for that.
We absolutely can.
I'm sorry that
perfectly
things are
fine.
broken up like this.
We can, if I could ever get a hold of Jason Hayes, we can have you two on again and we
Yeah.
can talk about.
Oh, I'd
some
love
more
to do that.
Yeah. That'd be cool.
Yeah,
Me and Jason. Yeah, I'd love to do if you want to do a 2-person talk with Jason Hayes. I'd love to.
We'll have to see if we can get
Jason's great. You would have to, respectfully, you would have to just sit there and listen because me and Jason would just talk over.
No.
that is perfectly fine.
That would be good with me.
That is exactly what the
Let's
show.
work.
That is what the
Let's
audience
work
is
for
looking
me.
for.
You would just listen to us talk about our
Nope.
kids and stuff like that. So
Oh.
Yeah. That's fine.
That's fine.
Do what you want, man.
Okay, then I guess we can wrap up with the final question. I'll let you do it, Mark.
What is your favorite race in StarCraft?
I like the Terrans, and I'll tell you why. I like the concept of the space idiot. There's a lot of competency there with the Terrans, but I think we know that the rank and file are just kind of dudes, which was the whole point, is that they were kind of space truckers, not very bright. As we see from the one video of them packing in beer with the nitrous, the frozen nitrogen to keep the bomb cold. I just love that kind of, shit kicker in space. I kind of like that.
And we got to talk with James Page, who did a lot of those, and boy, he personified.
You can tell.
Yeah. And I don't get me wrong. I love the Zerg and I love the Protoss. It was nice to be there, helping see them come along. But the Terrans always have a special place in my heart, just for being like, oh, you space idiots, you
space idiots.